Today's episode is proudly brought to you by Just Wallet. If you're interested in the future of money, the fourth industrial revolution, have a look over at Just Wallet, a private individual account, a business account, a corporate account, or a university student account. Just Wallet is a pay system that can send money across different time zones and country borders, but it's all used with tech and it is much more efficient. Have a look at Just Wallet. Good afternoon to you. Welcome to the show. I'm privileged to have a wonderful guest lined up for you today. Captain Dennis Dolan was the former president of IFALPA, which is the International Federation of Airline Pilots Association. They represent more than 100,000 pilots in more than 100 countries, and we're going to get into the nature of the work of this high-performance team as the president of IFALPA. His background and training is trained by the U.S. Air Force, operating in the U.S. Marines, F-4 Phantoms, more than 300 combat missions, qualified later as a lawyer, cum laude, and used that to great effect in negotiations and working up in the Airline Pilots Association at Delta Airlines. It's going to be a wonderful chat. We're going to talk about current affairs and the future of air travel and the cyclical nature of the industry. Please stay with me. It's going to be lots of fun. My name's Alex McPhail. This is High Performance Teams. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, it's great to have you. I appreciate your time. I know as a retiree, you could be doing some fun in your wood shop, your hobby and passion, but thank you for the time today. So I would like to rewind the clock a little bit and just ask you a little bit about some formative years, if I may. As a youth,
Sure.
Teenager time, what was an inspiration for you to get involved in flying? Was there someone in the family, or what was your start for flying?
Well, actually, when I was a youngster, I had, like most young boys do, a fascination with airplanes. I built model airplanes, flew them a little bit, but never really seriously considered becoming a pilot until I was in university. And a good friend of mine there, he actually talked me into going into the Marine Corps, and he had a private pilot's license. He took me up flying, and he wanted to be a pilot as well in the Marine Corps. And so that really generated the seed, if you will, for me to become a pilot. And that's where it all started as far as the actual piloting part.
Great, all right. And as we mentioned now, you trained in the USAF trained you, and there was a bit of an unusual situation, but you were actually signed up in the Marine Corps. So what was going on there? Was that a test run? Was that something they continued with, or was that the training ground for the Marine Corps to go in the USAF?
Well, actually, it was a unique program. And what was happening during the Vietnam War, there were so many pilots that needed to be trained. The U.S. Navy and the Marine Corps are both under the Department of the Navy. It's kind of an odd way to characterize it, but they're separate services, but under the Department of Navy. Department of the Navy was responsible for training all naval aviators. That's what a Marine pilot or a Navy pilot is called.
Okay.
And during the Vietnam War, they were having a problem meeting their quota for training, particularly for Marine pilots. Mm-hmm. So the Pentagon decided that the answer to that problem was to ask the Air Force to train 150 Marine pilots every year. The Air Force has quite a large training facility, a number of bases in the U.S.
Okay.
So they decided to do that, and I had orders originally to go to naval flight training in Pensacola, Florida.
Okay.
But my recruiting officer called me and he said, we've got this new program. The USAF is going to train 150 pilots a year. Would you be interested in doing that? And oh, by the way, you'll be guaranteed jets if you go through their training. And I said, sign me up, because my goal was to be a fighter pilot, and basically that sounded great to me. And so that's how I got into the Air Force Flight School.
Okay, that sounds good. And obviously, sign me up for jets is a common theme as well. I feel the same way. So just to welcome the people that are in the show, the person that connected us up, Tony Lobshow, says hello and good to see you again. Brian Spurs here. We've got some Watty and Fran and my father Rod. So please, it's an interactive show, guys. Bring your questions. I've got some questions lined up. Your best questions we will tackle too. So you get to fly jets, and you are. I actually didn't realize that the Marines was part of the Navy. So you get to fly F4 Phantoms, and you do a couple of tours in Vietnam. I want to focus on one particular story which you've written about recently, although it happened many years ago. And I noticed, and I'm sure it has not lost on you, the specific date, September 11th, but 1972, and not in the 2000s. Tell me about this mission. Okay, so maybe the synopsis being that you guys were out on a patrol, you were hit, and take it from there. Your first experience, you being hit, and the aircraft does not fly the same as it was. I'm going to put some pictures up as you talk.
Okay. Well, this particular mission was what's called an alpha strike. And an alpha strike is a large group of airplanes attacking kind of a big target like a railroad yard or a power plant. And in conjunction with that, the role of the fighters, there's two roles. One is what's called a target cap, which they're over the target and they protect the strike force. The other is called MIG cap. And the MIG cap basically is there to protect against any threats that the enemy might bring toward the strike group. So we were on the MIG cap that day, and basically right after we went to the tankers, we headed toward our flight station, and then we were vectored a change in direction toward Hanoi. There were two other fighters in our squadron that had taken off before us. They were the first ones launched, so they were vectored first, and we were vectored behind them. And this particular target area was right over Hanoi, which at the time was the most heavily defended city ever by anti-aircraft, both by missiles and cannon and all sorts of other things. So we wound up going to this area, and the other two fighters that launched before us were engaged with MiGs, and we could see the smoke trails from missile shoots that they had done. In fact, one of our airplanes in our squadron shot down one confirmed MiG and a probable kill on another. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we got into this fight, and it became pretty evident to us after about 2 minutes into the fight that the North Vietnamese, they were finished for the day. And one of the tactics that they used considerably during the war was that they didn't engage in dogfights except over airfields that were, in their area. And what they could do is if they had the advantage, they would continue to fight. If they lost the advantage, they'd break the fight off and land. And so that's what happened here. They broke the fight off and landed. And while we were in the area with all this tremendous amount of anti-aircraft fire and missiles, we decided to leave the area and head back to the ship. At that time, we got a missile warning in the cockpit on our electronic countermeasures gear. That's a SAM missile exploding there. We looked for the missile, we didn't see it, and as soon as I rolled the airplane back upright, we got hit by the missile, and it really knocked the airplane pretty hard, both in pitch and roll. And I lost positive feel for the pitch system, and had a hard over rudder as a result of the hit. Mm-hmm. So I managed to recover the airplane. It was basically out of control for a short period of time. I recovered the airplane and assessed the damage. The engines were working good.
Can I just interrupt for a sec? So when you were hit, you were doing about 600 knots, if I remember correctly. So to be out of control at that kind of speed, that takes some doing to just get back on top of this wild bucking bronco.
I would say it was quite a ride. It really, never seen anything like it before, obviously. Sure. And yet the airplane was seriously damaged by the missile, and I managed to get it back under control. I let the airplane do a lot of the recovery. Airplanes have inherent stability built into them, mm-hmm. So once we recovered it, I could tell basically the control system was really quite damaged. but fortunately the engines and the hydraulics were working properly, and we were able to make a decision to get the airplane headed back out to the water, where we'd have an opportunity to really assess the damage and come up with some options there. So we elected to get to the what we called feet wet, or back out over the water as quickly as possible. In order to do that, we engaged both afterburners, and it was quite a ride from where we were back to the beach, and probably we were going at roughly 1,200 miles an hour by the time we got to the beach. So,
and a crippled airplane.
Hopefully the airplane held together, and it did, fortunately. So, but it was a really impressive experience on me. It taught me an awful lot about myself, about the airplane, about combat, about tactics, about other things, about teamwork for sure.
Okay, I want to zoom in on a few things that you've said there. So firstly, I'm just going to put that picture up. So this is an impressive, as we said in the week, this is a real airplane. This is a lot of power. It's a big thing. It's capable. It's fast. It can carry a lot of arms. But there you can see that there's a two cockpit. But the person in the back is your weapons officer, or you call him the Rio.
Yes.
He's not a pilot. So maybe just explain the role and the interplay between the two of you. This is high performance teams, and this is high performance teams at the cutting edge of it. So talk about this communication, this teamwork within the cockpits, and then also that you've got wingman and a strike, please.
All right. Well, the term RIO, R-I-O, is Radar Intercept Officer. This airplane, the Phantom, was originally designed to be an interceptor, and the role of the person in the back was as a weapons system officer. He ran the radar, he set up the intercepts, and so on. But as the airplane actually developed, as you can see here, this is not an interceptor role. This is strictly a fighter-bomber role in that picture. And so the role of the Rio in the fighter arena would be to assist the pilot by giving the pilot in the front information, such as altitude, airspeed, dive angle, if you're going to deliver bombs. And then in the tactical arena, where you're actually fighting another airplane or in a dogfight, the person in back is an extra set of eyes, tremendous amount of value added to the airplane. He also is trained in the maneuvers that you're flying, and he can see what the other airplane is doing, what you're doing. So the teamwork back and forth is really a thing to behold, but it takes time to develop that. Now, my Rio, in both cases, and the shot that was just there was the Chulai tour, and then on the aircraft carrier, it was two different people, but they were my roommates. So, we lived together, we flew together, we really bonded a lot. We knew each other very well, and in the airplane especially, that's important because you get used to a certain rhythm, and the teamwork that's there is very difficult to describe, but it's the ultimate type of teamwork, especially in a combat zone where your life and others are at stake.
Sure. Okay. Well, so now just to understand that dynamic, right? We can get into the details in a bit, but so let's go back to the position now. And I also want to bring in the physiology of the moment. As we talked off air beforehand, the sequence of ejection taking place, you get that temporal distortion taking place. And just talk me through those moments. It was probably 1 or 2 seconds where you had that feeling, as you described in that book. Right now, I need some clarity of thought, and I've got a few options, and you're taking in information. So tell us through that, and then at the end you can express how quickly that actually happened.
Well, as we entered the fight, I saw the other airplanes in our squadron. I got in behind one of them to protect his 6 o'clock, basically. And at that time, my mind shifted into a slow motion type of a situation I'd never experienced before. And after the fact, and after reading about these things, this is a common thing when there's an awful lot of stress and basically pressure on your to perform certain things in a certain way. And what happened is my mind slowed down into absolute slow motion. I was able to look at the situation and make a lot of assessments and judgments in a very short period of time. I was able to judge my position on the airplane in front of me, what maneuvers I would need to perform to be able to stay in that position. Was this the best position? Could I find another position? How much fuel did I have? Where were the other airplanes? Where was the anti-aircraft fire coming from? All these things were done and evaluations made in probably 1 or 2 seconds. And it's an amazing thing to think about now that your mind can work that quickly. But that's the type of capacity that the human brain has that most of the time we don't ever experience. But
Sure.
under that particular type of stress, I was able to experience that.
Okay, yeah, it's an amazing thing. And I want to dive into some of the questions coming to. So Quibus has joined us and he's asking about the risk management model. What type of risk management model was used? We're going back to the point now you've been hit and you're dealing with this crippled airplane. You first get flying.
Yeah.
What type of risk management model being used after being hit? Because the air forces were not big on things like that, like the airlines were, but had more of a no guts, no glory approach. So explain the thought process, the interplay, the communication with your Rio, with your intercept ATC, the tanker, the ship, etc.
Right. Well, the initial risk management is the airplane flyable? You have to first of all evaluate what you have in front of you there. So yes, the airplane was flyable, and the risk of it not being flyable was we would have to jump out of the airplane and probably become prisoners of war. So obviously there was a lot of incentive to get the airplane out of that area and back to the ship if possible. So what we did was we evaluated all the systems that we did have and all the systems that we didn't have. We didn't have any airspeed indicator, have no altimeter, we had no vertical speed indication. We lost all of our ECM gear. The controls was full nose down. There was no trim, no stabilizer trim. Other than that, the airplane was flying, and I could maneuver it, but it was very sloppy. So we decided our best risk management under this situation was to get the airplane back out over the water as quickly as we could. Mm-hmm. So we told our wingmen that we'd been hit and that we were going to head out in the direction that we came in, which was southeast in this case. So we picked up that heading, and he had lost sight of us after we got hit because of the crazy maneuvers the airplane did. He lost sight of us. Okay. And it was a very confusing time for all the airplanes. And so we started heading out, and we were communicating between myself and my Rio back and forth about the status of the airplane. I was telling him how it was flying, what it felt like. It was a tremendous amount of nose down pressure at the high speed that we're at. I mean, I was overcome with adrenaline, so it didn't register like it normally would, but it was a tremendous amount of force on the stick. We got the airplane going straight and level and headed in the direction of the beach. We were in contact with the controller there. Red Crown was the name of the controller. It was an air traffic control station, if you will, located on a cruiser out in the Gulf of Tonkin. Okay. Told them that we'd been hit, told them that we were low on fuel when we got out over the water. We needed to go to one of the tankers. Unfortunately, the other section of airplanes, the one that shot the MiG down, they were going out in a different direction, and they were hit. One of the airplanes was hit by a SAM as well, and he went out of control and had to eject. Fortunately, it was over the water. The other airplane was extremely low on fuel. So they had 2 tankers airborne. They vectored one toward, they vectored both of them toward those 2 airplanes. And when I told them I needed a tanker, they turned one around and the tanker started heading back toward us. So now we're out over the water, and the assessment there, the risk management assessment, is what do we do with the airplane? We only had less than 2,000 pounds of fuel in the F4. That the low fuel light was already on. We're 150 miles from the aircraft carrier. We couldn't get back to the ship and make an approach with that amount of fuel. We had to go to the tanker, or the alternative was we had to jump out of the airplane. So we prepared ourselves for an ejection, assuming that we might not be fortunate enough to get to the tanker. Okay. We did manage to get to the tanker. It was very difficult to maneuver the airplane to get behind him, and plugging into the basket with the probe sticking out there it's a bit of a trick unless you do it often enough, and then you get used to doing it. I'd done it a lot on the ship. I knew I was only going to get one try, and I was totally concentrating. I was able to get it in, the probe into the basket, take the fuel.
Yeah. Oh, can I just pause you? I want to come back to that, okay, but I don't want to gloss over this point, because air-to-air refueling is not something you just do. It's not just like flying an airplane. There's all the pressure dynamics that pushes the probe away, and it takes a particular skill. I mean, you say you get used to it and you get better at it, but even if you're good at it and you regulate it, it doesn't mean you're going to get it every time. And so if you don't get it, I mean, that's more time, more stress, and like anything, when you do something that requires your maximum ability and it doesn't work, that adds more stress for the next time. Like doing a go-around, the stress is built up for the next approach. So although you said you got it first time, that's a major achievement considering a crippled airplane with one opportunity. But tell us your fuel situation as you plugged.
Well, I looked at the fuel prior to this. It was less than 1,000 pounds, which is less than 10 minutes remaining. This is before we got to the tanker. Yeah. After we got to the tanker, maneuvered the airplane, got behind and plugged in. When I plugged into the basket, a green light comes on a tanker that says fuel's being transferred. Okay. I looked down at the fuel gauge, and it was at 200 pounds. 200 pounds is basically the tolerance of the fuel gauge. So essentially, it was virtually empty.
Sure.
And I knew we were going to have that problem. And I told the tanker driver, if we don't get plugged in and we flame out, you need to start going downhill so I can get in behind you and try to plug in. We went over those details as well. But it was an amazing thing to see at 200 pounds. I mean, that's just nothing. It's nothing. It's fumes. And so we were able to get plugged in and took on some fuel. I told the tanker I needed more fuel if I was going to go back to the ship and land. So he got permission to give me some more. And it was enough to go back and at least shoot an approach.
Okay, so now, now you talk about just shooting an approach. So there's a very small category of people that land jets on moving ships at sea. But now you've got a crippled airplane with the stress of the fuel and no instruments, and now you have to shoot an approach. So this is not just shooting an approach. So tell me about the planning, the briefing, the preparation, and the execution of this task.
Yeah, the airplane was damaged to the point where I knew it would be iffy to get the airplane back aboard, but we had no place else to go. We had two choices here. We could either try to make the approach and see how that went and maybe get aboard, or we could jump out of the airplane because there were no divert fields around. We're up near North Vietnam, and basically that was the only choice we had, was to go back to the ship. So we went back, and I told my wingman, who had joined up by then, he looked us over, he said, the whole bottom of the airplane's full of holes. I said, well, I'm not surprised to hear that. But what I wanted to do was take the airplane back to the ship, knowing that it would be perhaps a dangerous approach with an airplane that wasn't functioning properly. And I told the ship what was going on, requested permission to dirty up, in other words, lower the landing gear and the flaps and the tail hook about 5 miles behind the ship at around 3,000 feet. That way, if the airplane went out of control when we did that, we would have enough altitude to eject it. It would be far enough away from the ship where it wouldn't be a hazard. So we got permission to do that. We dirtied the airplane up. The wingman checked it over. He said everything was good, and we flew alongside each other, and I checked out. I had my angle of attack gauge, which is normally what you use to land on a carrier anyway, working, and was able to check against his speed. He said the speed looks fine, the flaps are all down, the gear's down, the airplane's ready to land. So we proceeded on the approach to the carrier. Okay. And I'll tell you what the problem at that point was when I realized, we're going to be able to do this. My hand grabbing the stick for about 40 minutes with a tremendous amount of pressure on it was so cramped and tired, I could hardly hold on to the stick. But the adrenaline, as you said, landing on a carrier is always a bit of a challenge, and especially under these types of circumstances, the adrenaline overcame all the discomfort. Okay. And I managed to proceed forward.
And then you got that hook. And tell me that feeling when you fall forward in your seat.
You know, maneuvering an airplane in position to land on a carrier is it takes a lot of fine precision movements. You have to be very precise. Everything has to be right. The lineup has to be right. The glide slope has to be right, and the speed has to be right, because there are certain parameters that have to be met. Otherwise, it becomes a dangerous approach, and they won't let you land.
Sure.
So getting all that lined up was difficult, especially with a broken airplane. And when we finally got close to the ship, I was a little bit high, so I took a little bit of power off and was able to come down and land and get the number 4 wire. There's 4 wires, arresting wires. Number 4 is the last one. We hooked into that, and the feeling of relief when the airplane stopped on the deck was just undescribable. I mean, it was the best feeling I've ever had. You know, we got this really heavily damaged airplane back. We landed, and now here we are. You know, we're safe aboard the ship. So it was a tremendous amount of, you know, almost all the energy that I had left just sort of went away, because, you know, now that the situation was no longer dire. So it was a tremendous feeling.
Okay. Oh, and I want to get to, in a minute, after climbing out of the cockpit, some of the questions are coming through. Sean, Brigitte, thanks for joining. Nice to see you here. They're asking, in the F4 crew, are you always paired with the same Rio?
Not always. What you do, particularly in a combat situation, usually in an operational squadron, but particularly in a combat situation, almost always fly with the same Rio. But there's going to be times when either one of you are not available and you fly with someone else, but it's normally done with the same person for the teamwork aspect that we discussed earlier, where you want to make sure that you both know each other very well and you know your habits, and it's very much more efficient way to do things if you have the same person. Okay,
so it's preferable, but it doesn't always end up that way. And then
not always.
Tony is asking, how do you and your Rio team up to operate together? Are you paired by a selection process, or are you involved in that?
Well, it's a little bit of each, somewhat by seniority, somewhat by how much experience does the pilot have and how much experience does the Rio have. You wouldn't want to put 2 brand new people together. That's not a good combination. Sure. And usually the squadron commander, he gets his choice of who he wants to be his Rio, because he knows that this person, he's been around them a while.
Sure.
But as you go down, normally it's a bit of matching the seniority and experience with, oh, I know this friend. This is a friend of mine. I'd like to have him as my Rio. So it's kind of a dual consideration.
Okay. All right. Now then, going back to getting out of the cockpit, and just to illustrate the point of the strain on your arm, you had some blood vessel damage, and just describe what your arm looked like at the end of this 40 minutes of your life.
Well, when I finally rolled up my flight suit, my right arm, it looked like somebody had taken a hammer and hit me on the forearm. There was a big bruise there, what looked like a bruise. It was all black and blue. And I checked with the flight surgeon. I showed it to him. He said, well, you just popped some blood vessels in that arm from pulling so hard. Sure. And he said, it's just like a bruise. It'll go away in a few days. It'll probably be a little uncomfortable, but it's nothing to worry about.
Okay. So, well, it just highlights the point that there were so many complex and high-risk, dangerous things going on in this mission. I can see why you call it the most challenging mission. We spent a lot of time talking about it because it's been thrilling, and it's been a great tale to hear it from the horse's mouth. But Dennis, I want to zoom to a point to kick off in the other direction in terms of the airlines.
Okay, sure.
Tell me the lessons learned out of that guided the rest of your thinking and your approach to work and life here on out.
Well, the experience I got from that particular mission by itself was one that, let's face it, I faced dying a couple times that day, losing the airplane. Who knows what would have happened if I had been a prisoner of war, those sort of things. So it was a very cathartic type of a situation. And after the fact, sitting down, thinking about it, I decided that basically I've been given another chance in life here. And I needed to take advantage of that. And what I learned from this particular situation was, number one, you have to give 100% in order to get a difficult situation under control and get a positive outcome. What that means is you have to put all your energy into doing something like this, but you also have to understand that there's some times when you're going to be out of your element. You shouldn't try to do things that you can't do. It's one thing to say I have the impossible dream, but you have to be realistic. I learned that. I learned how much my family meant to me, because during this incident, of course, you hear people talk about your life flashes in front of you. Well, I thought about my family. I wasn't married at the time, but my brothers, my mom and dad, and so on, it's very dear to you, and it comes home in a situation like this. And then I made a promise to myself that I would do the best that I could, and whatever I wanted to do in the future, I wanted to learn everything I could, do everything I could, and be good at doing what I'm going to do. So it really taught me a lot about myself and what life is really worth. And so that was the start of it. After, it was a real difficult decision for me to get out of the Marine Corps. I'd gotten married and had a young son at the time, but made the decision that probably best for me to move in a different direction. And at the time I got out in 1976, the airlines weren't hiring at that time. We'd still had, we had the oil crisis of the early 70s, and there was still a bit of a carryover. They were starting to think about hiring, but they weren't. So I said my alternative might be to go to law school. So I applied and was accepted at St. Louis University. And then when I was about to make a decision to do that, I got a call from Western Airlines saying, we'd like to interview you for a job. So I put off the law school and took the airline job.
Okay.
But it worked out that I went to law school later on, a few years later, and managed to get my law degree and set up the law practice for a few years.
Okay, great. Now, so I want to zoom in on this a bit now. So you get the exposure and the experience having studied law, working in law, but all the while you're still an airline pilot. Western merges with Delta, and you get involved in the union work there. And how did your combination of your sort of military work ethic, operational background, your new negotiation with yourself that you'll give 100% to whatever you do, and then getting stuck in at the union level? I mean, what sort of challenges did you see in front of you that you could sink your teeth into and say, right, this is for me?
Well, first of all, let's go back to the law degree. A law degree is a tremendous education. It gives you a really different way of thinking about things. It also polishes up your writing skills, your thinking skills, and logic skills, which are all very important. I'd have to say that I got into the union work almost, I never wanted to get into it. I didn't go up and say, hey, can I work on this or work on that? Someone asked me, would you be interested in helping us with the Delta Western merger? Not on the committee, but as a technician. I said, sure. So that's how it started for me in the union work. And it became evident right away that the legal background was a tremendous asset in the union work, because a lot of the things in union work involve contracts, they involve negotiations, they involve legal issues. So it was a very nice complement to the union work. And so all these things kind of start out slowly. First I worked with the merger committee, then I was on the Delta negotiating committee after the merger. That was a 3-year effort, and learned a tremendous amount about not only the union, but about negotiations and how they're conducted, and personalities and all the other things that you learn dealing with people. So it was a tremendous skill exposure to me to be able to see these different parts of the situation. And I slowly moved up into other jobs after the negotiations. I was a representative, then an executive vice president, then a Delta MEC chairman.
Okay.
Then first vice president, and then IFALPA president.
Okay.
So,
all right. I just want to I want to get to the specifics of the union work here. I want to just share
Okay.
a fellow legal and pilot colleague, Fani Kutsia, has joined. And just to round out the story just to round out the story of your mission, he'd like to know what was the most difficult part of that mission, because you mentioned a lot of aspects about being shot, controllability, the fuel and the tanker and everything. And if you could just choose, what would you say was the most difficult part of that whole exercise?
Well, from a flying standpoint, there were two I would put in kind of the same category. One of them was recovering the airplane from the initial hit by the missile. That was a real handful. And the second one was actually landing the airplane on the ship.
Sure.
Both of them were very difficult, and frankly, they were both dangerous. And you can't get probably any more dangerous than having an airplane going 600 knots, completely out of control, and over enemy territory, about as enemy as you can get.
Sure.
So,
okay.
But the landing on the ship was a real challenge because my arm was sore, and all the other little things. But that's always a challenge. So.
Okay. Thanks.
Those two, I'd have to put them.
Thanks for your questions there, Fani, as well. Okay, so I want to then fast forward, and that was all to say that our nice background to your skill is that you move towards with your realization, you contract yourself to work the best of your ability. You move towards representing more than 100,000 pilots in 100 countries as the president of IFALPA. But you've done it too. You're not a person that's running the show because you want to be in management. You've been that pilot, you've operated, you know what it's like to operate, and now you're representing pilots. So tell me about your thought process, putting your hat in the ring and saying, I'm keen for this, and I think I can do a good job, and being accepted and taken over the office, and you are now the president of IFALPA. What was sort of the thoughts at that time?
Well, what motivated me, as I got involved in international aviation, I flew international for a while, and also U.S. ALPA as the first vice president. That position traditionally is the link between ALPA and the international community through IFALPA. And I always had a lot of respect for IFALPA, and didn't know a lot about the organization initially. And as I got more involved in union work, I learned more about it. And also, you have to put into perspective that the aviation in general had started becoming globalized and became more and more globalized. So it was even more important that we have a presence in international aviation. And the old saying about negotiations is, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. And so, it's very important that you have input. And if you think about the amount of international aviation that we have now versus, let's say, 25 years ago,
sure,
it's a mind-boggling. So there was a lot of motivation from the fact that this is probably where the future of aviation is going to be. It's going to be a globalized world. There's going to be a lot of global aviation and expansion and so on, notwithstanding what we're going through right now. But sure, basically, I thought there would be a real challenge to get involved in that. And as I got more involved in IFALPA, I saw that there was an opportunity for me to add some of the things that I had learned. And like most people, you think you can improve the situation, and sure, that's the main reason that I threw my hat in the ring, so to speak. And there was a lot of things that I thought IFALPA could be improved upon. Training, for example. Also, the organization was formed in 1948 in response to the formation of ICAO. Okay. And actually, the structure of the organization hadn't been changed since 1948.
Wow.
So it was time to modernize it, and took that task on, and that was one of the first things that we did. So. Okay. But there was a lot of challenges. There are always a lot of challenges, but there were a lot of challenges there, and I felt that I could add some value to it.
Okay. Now I want to try something. I'm not sure if this is going to work, how it lands with you. So answer as you see fit. Let's zoom into today. I appreciate that you're now retired for several years, but this is a major event for the world, but particularly for air travel. You've seen kind of similar kind of things before, maybe not on the exact same scale, but at your time in the helm, you saw big things happening too. So Is there a way that you can explain, having seen some things in your experience, what the logical next steps are for aviation, for pilots, for jobs, for passengers, for the industry, for economics? Maybe just share through what the general public and pilots watching can take home and may take a bit of confidence in that this is a cyclical pattern, although it's a big cycle this time around.
Yeah. Well, this is the likes of this particular situation we've never seen before. That's pretty obvious. But if you look at this industry, it's been a cyclic and changing industry right from the very beginning. And there have been a lot of traumatic things that have occurred to the industry. For example, a worldwide depression in the 30s, World War in the 40s. The 50s, a transition from prop airplanes to jet airplanes, began a lot more international travel. The 60s had a lot of bankruptcies. The 70s had a lot of expansions all over the world. These things come and go, and basically the industry adapts to them. But there's an old saying that you used to hear from economists that said, when the economy gets a cold, the airlines get pneumonia. Well, this is another situation where the tremendous hit that the airlines have taken because of the coronavirus is just an amazing thing to see. Mm-hmm. So the most comparable thing that I could, or most comparable parallel I could draw here would be between what happened after the 9/11 terrorist attacks and what's happening now. After 9/11, the industry got shut down temporarily for a few days. Everything had to be changed. We had to become a lot more security conscious. That was one of my jobs at US ALPA. I was the head of the security task force there. Tremendous amount of interface with government agencies and other people to try to get this situation back to some sort of normalcy. We were dealing with an enemy, if you will, the terrorists, who wanted to cause a huge amount of damage and destruction and death, and we had to use our best efforts to prevent that. But we've got a similar situation here with COVID-19. It's an invisible enemy, but it's a killer, and it's something that we have to deal with, and we have to be able to do it in such a manner that the traveling public will have confidence in us. They have a lot of confidence in airline personnel anyway, particularly in pilots, because they know that we train hard, we work hard, we do a lot of things that a lot of people don't really like or wouldn't do, but we still have to be able to get the confidence back to them that things are okay. And what I see here, we have to use our best efforts, knowing what we know now in the interim, wearing masks and being very cautious about distance from other people. Don't fly if you're sick. Don't get around other people if you're sick. But I think what the real game changer will be here is when we're able to get a vaccine that will put a lot of this stuff way down the list as far as danger. Sure. It's natural to have fear. Everybody has fear, and I can certainly understand passengers saying, "Well, I don't think I should try that right now." We've got to convince them that we've taken care of the dangers. We've got it back to an area where normalcy is beginning to come back, and we'll do our best, as we always have and always will, to make sure that you have a safe flight. And I think it's going to take some time. Just like 9/11 took time. It was a long haul. We had to engineer new doors. We had to put all kinds of changes into the system. We have all this security apparatus at airports now. I don't think we'll have quite the physical changes that we're talking about here, but we're going to have a lot of psychological change and medical issues with the vaccine. Once we get to that stage, I think we'll see the industry begin to come back somewhat toward normalcy. The biggest issue I see with this, a lot of the international travel is probably at risk for the carriers now, because we've had people working from home and doing things electronically, and they'll see that there's a cost savings here. We don't need to send somebody from Atlanta to Joburg or from Atlanta to Frankfurt or for whatever reason. We can do it electronically. there's going to be some portion that won't come back because of that. But I think eventually the leisure travel and a lot of the business travel will recover. It's just going to take some time.
What is your estimate in sort of the time frame? I mean, as a pilot, you often get asked, what do you think is going to happen? How can I get back? Repatriation flights, I'm stuck in Cuba, I want to get to X. What do you think is going to happen in terms of the industry? When does it show sort of green shoots that it's returning in its improvement, not in its numbers yet, in its improvement that things are coming back?
I think it'll have a temporary improvement while we're doing the social distancing and wearing masks and being much more sanitizing conscious. But the real recovery is not going to start until we get a vaccine, because that's going to be enough reassurance to the traveling public that it's okay. That's the term I would use. It's okay to fly now. The danger from the COVID virus is totally minimized, about as much as the common flu and other things like SARS. They came and went, but they weren't nearly as prolific as this particular virus is.
Sure.
But I think it's going to take maybe a year before we, as you say, get the green shoots coming up. Maybe a little bit less, hopefully, depending on how quickly they can get the vaccine.
Okay. And so now to just carry on a bit on the theme of IFALPA, so maybe the general public listening are not completely familiar. So you're representing that each airline has its own pilots association or union, for a layman's term, and these unions are all subscribed to the main body, the International Federation of the Airline Pilots Associations. So what is actually the job? Because the way you've been talking is that you're almost selling the story on behalf of an airline, not on behalf of the pilot. And is it a case of what's good for business means the pilots stay in their job longer and more growth, or is it a mandate of IFALPA and ALPA to support the business interests of the airline?
Well, there's a bit of a subtle distinction that you have to make between IFALPA and the pilot association in a particular country or airline, and that is, it's the International Federation of Airline Pilots Association. It's not the International Union of Airline Pilot Association. So the IFALPA is more of a, I'd say, safety organization in that it is able to interface with ICAO, whose job is primarily to set the standards for safety and airline operations on a worldwide basis. That's kind of the primary underlying mission, but you can't separate that from the industrial aspects either. And in fact, ICAO has even gotten into some of those in recent years, where they realize that the industrial part of it, the underlying issues are such that they can't be completely separated. And the safety has its place. Obviously, it's a very high priority, but you have to accommodate the other parts of the business.
Sure.
So when you look at IFALPA, from the standpoint of, let's say, being the president, which I was, the ability to interface with all the different cultures and societies around the world, and be able to learn. There's more than one way to skin a cat, as the old saying goes. There's a lot of ways to do things, and each culture has their own way, maybe, of expressing how they do things. Yeah. But the one thing that what I always told pilots whenever I talked to them was, there's a lot of differences between our associations. There's a lot of cultural differences, but the view out of the cockpit is always the same. It is. Yeah. It doesn't matter. You're looking at the same things. You're looking at the instruments. That's all the same. That's where the commonality is between pilots. And we need to build on that. Use that commonality to try to address these other issues that come up in the world. And I'll bring up one example where the cultural issues are tremendously divergent. And that is, after 9/11, there was a big push in certain areas of the world, the United States was one of them, to have armed individuals on the airplane and even arm the pilots. Okay. That's just completely abhorrent to other cultures. They say, we don't want anything to do with that. We don't want any weapons on the airplane. We can't live with that. That was a very difficult situation to try to homogenize between all the different cultures. But you have to take into consideration certain cultures they're not gonna buy into that. And so you don't make rules that force them to do it. You can't do that. You have to find other ways to accommodate the cultural differences. So those are big challenges, and they take a lot of work. And the work of all the people involved in these things, I want to give credit to all of them for all of the things that they do to help make these problems, or address these problems. It's not the person at the top basically is just a director.
Yeah.
All the other people are the ones that do the work.
Sure.
So I give them a lot of credit.
That's great. Dennis, so we're talking about the two main themes generally in the channel of all the different guests that we've spoken with, and one is that it is a teamwork. This is not something that you get done on your own, and certainly it's sometimes easier to see who the team is, but always there's a team that's almost even further back behind the curtain. So I don't know if you want to mention some particular roles or people that came and went along the way where, operating in high-performing teams, running the IFALPA, and there's a bunch of people that make it that the team is performing well. Was there some specific aspects to it that allowed you to execute your job as the president well?
Well, of course, you got to give a tremendous amount of credit to the staff. I mean, they're the ones that support the organization day in and day out, and really help make the organization run. And they're the ones that bring the continuity to the next. An elected officer is there for a certain period of time, and then he or she leaves. But the staff tend to be there on an ongoing basis, and they have the corporate knowledge and the continuity to make the organization function on an ongoing basis. So there's a tremendous amount of credit that needs to be given to those individuals. That's true in any pilot organization. The staff, they're the basis of the foundation of why the organization is able to continue doing its job. So there's a tremendous amount. And I've always given a lot of credit to my family. My wife especially has been very supportive of me and doing all this work. It's a lot of time and effort away from family. And, I have 3 wonderful kids and 2 daughters-in-laws and two grandchildren. But, the family is, in my opinion, is a tremendous asset in helping a person to be able to face these challenges and do the work. So if you're looking at behind the scenes people, those are the ones that I would point to quite readily. Okay,
and often they're the unsung heroes too. They don't go to all the international things. They're not featured in the limelight as much, but they are the ones that allow the ship to continue. Thanks for sharing that. And the other aspect, or one of the questions that has come through on other social channels, Carl wants to know, is there a move towards these 3 different licenses? Is that something that IFALPA is a part of? Is there any going to be one single license that a pilot can be a pilot anyway, or are we always going to have these segregated, do your license for this part of the world aspect?
Well, I'm not sure what to say on that. There's a lot of politics involved in that. There's a lot of issues about training. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of money involved in some of these things at some point. So I would only be speculating about it. From a pure standpoint, I think that you could have one license that would say if you want someone to be an airline pilot that carries passengers, this particular license covers that.
Sure.
Now, that's not to say that there shouldn't be some subtleties in there as well, but I think the more you're able to concentrate on the main issue here and the main job, the better. And it identifies you as who you are and what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
I hope that answers the question. But
sure. No, it makes a lot of sense that there would be, obviously there's a history to it, and to unbundle something that's already entrenched, your FAA, EASA, etc., the Middle East, the Far East, it would be a tricky thing. And I suppose it's not necessarily a priority to get that right. We're not talking about 20 different licenses. There's a handful of the main ones. So I suppose to unbundle all of that. It's been wonderful chatting with you, Dennis. I really appreciate your time. I want to just ask a last question, if I may.
Sure.
Having been involved in all sorts of different teams, being a Marine, being on the ship, working as a lawyer, being involved in your own union, mergers, ending up as the president of IFALPA. You've seen high-performance teams come and go. You've been involved in them. You've probably created some of them. What is your top tip to create a high-performance team?
Well, I mean, in my opinion, anything that you do requires thorough preparation. You have to have really good execution, and then you have to make sure the plan is working. I think you have to really look at those things, and you've got to hold yourself and the people you're working with to a high standard. If you don't hold someone to a high standard, or particularly yourself, you're only kidding yourself about what you're trying to do. You really have to be. You have to have good preparation and good execution. And once you do that, you have to make sure the plan's working. Planning is everything, in my opinion. I mean, you can't do just about anything without planning.
Okay, all right, that's great. I like the messages I'm hearing from you. We've got a last question coming in from Fani.
Sure.
And he says, in your opinion, do you think we are closer to the globalization phenomenon? Thinking back to the 1990s and Dwayne Worth during the IFALPA seminars, specific reference to the 3 regional airlines worldwide.
Well, I think we're moving in that direction. This COVID-19 has thrown a real wrench, a spanner, as you say, into the works right now. You have people moving in the other direction, not consolidating so much as just sort of shutting down almost to the point of saying, well, how are we going to deal with this? Once the industry gets back on its feet and starts moving forward, eventually, I think, excuse me, I think there will, excuse me. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I think there will be more consolidation. How much? It's hard to tell. I mean, we'll just have to see how the worldwide economy comes about and what happens after that. But yes, I think there's probably still going to be some more movement in that direction where we're going to wind up with a limited number of international carriers.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that answers your question there, Fani. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for your questions as well. Dennis, it's been wonderful to chat. I got so many more pictures and things we could talk about. I think we might have to schedule another conversation for another day. I appreciate your time today, okay. And keep healthy amid all the mess out there in the world.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, Alex. Thank you for inviting me, and I'd be happy to do it anytime. As you can see, I can talk without stopping almost.
That's wonderful. Thanks again, Dennis. I appreciate it.
All right, Alex. You take care. All the best.
Well, folks, it's been great having this conversation with someone that's such esteemed background training and delivery execution. If you are ready to take off, you want to charter a plane, you want to start learning to fly, you can send me an email to this address now, and we will take the discussion further. Please remember to subscribe, share, and like. Thanks so much for joining the show, and I will see you on the next one.